will flag me so that I pay attention to that. I will try to watch, but it's hard to do both at the same time. But thank you everybody for joining me. This is Elizabeth Wafel, and I am the lobbyist for Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails. I know many of you, but one of the questions I frequently receive as a lobbyist is, how do I do bonding? How can I get bonding for my park and trail? Other people get bonding for their park and trail. How can I get it for my park and trail? And so I'm here to answer your questions. And both, I'm going to talk a little bit about what bonding is, about whether it's the right path for funding your project. And then if it is the right path, how do you pursue it and what can you do to advance your projects? Like I said, if you have questions as we go along on those topics, let me know. But what is state bonding? State bonding is when the state borrows money for capital projects, and they're authorized to do this by the Minnesota Constitution, and they take out bonds and they appropriate a portion of those funds to different projects that have been designated by the legislature in the bonding bill that the governor has signed. Typically, the legislature can pass a bonding bill anytime that it's in session that it wants to, but the typical cycle is that they pass them on in the even year. So that would be next year. And there's sort of a rhythm to it. The typical cycle begins with prep work in the spring of the odd year. So right now, it culminates in that bill next year. So the time to start thinking about it is now if you want to be trying to get into the 2022 bonding bill. Now, if you've been following along what we've been doing legislatively this year, you may know the Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails has introduced a bonding bill that was actually heard several weeks ago. That was sort of in the hopes that there will be a bonding bill sort of off cycle. But what I'm talking really right now is more about the sort of on cycle regular bonding projects. And I'll tell you that we do see parks and trails that are part of the bonding bill. I also, in addition to representing the Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails, I represent the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, as well as several individual cities, and we have gotten bonding money for those clients. But the thing I'll point out is that demand is high for bonding dollars of any type of project. And so one of the first questions is it a good strategy for your project? And is it something, is this where you want to be spending your time? So that first question you want to ask yourself is bonding right for my project? And there's a number of different factors that I think play into whether or not your project is a good one for bonding. There's the project factors itself. First thing to think about is the project size. If it's kind of small, and I mean, there's no exact definition of small. I would say that definitely anything under, $500,000 or less is probably on the smaller side. The stuff I see that, Parks and Trails projects that I've seen make it into the bonding bill tend to be in sort of the $1 million to $4 million range. I've seen above, I've seen below, but that's sort of the roughly where I see it. If it's smaller, honestly, it's a lot easier, and I'll talk about some of the alternatives, but it's a lot easier to go for a grant program. If it is larger, if you are starting to get up into, above 5 or 6 million, I'll be honest, you get sticker shock at the legislature, and you may be better off asking, thinking about splitting your project in two. In fact, if you don't, you may have it split in two for you as you go forward, but something to think about. Another really important thing to remember is how much of a local match do you have? In other words, how much, if you're asking for $4 million, how much is your local community putting up to match that? The more you're putting up to match it, the more attractive your project is. If you have a $4 million project and you're not putting up a match, it's not as easy a sell as somebody who's got a $4 million project, but they're asking for two, putting up two. You're not necessarily required to have a match, but sort of the default under statute and in a bonding bill is that you put up a 50% match. And the reason I say that there's no requirement is because I'll be honest, I've been able to get it for clients to have less of a match, but you have to have that written into the language, and it's harder. So those are all things to think about, in terms of whether or not your project's a good one for bonding. Another really important factor is your local government support. Now, I know that, you're all in different positions. Some of you, I think, are, most of you here are, Parks and Trails professionals. I think some of you may be city administrators or county administrators, but having the support of your local government is crucial. And I'll talk a little bit about how it fits into the MMB, but it will be, I mean, it's important because you're going to need that support as you move it through the process. But it also sort of, the more indication of support you have from different corners, the more it will help with both your own legislator and um, the and other legislators. But quite frankly, if your city government or your county government is opposed to your project, it's going to be really hard to do through bonding. Community support. Now, this isn't a sort of do all, be all or end all for a bonding project, but I have found, at least on the projects I've worked on, we've been a lot more successful when we've been able to leverage support from the community, both to lean on our own legislators and to lean on legislators. And then the final factor to think about in terms of whether bonding is right for your project is your legislator. And I'm going to dive into that a little bit deeper. Whoops, sorry. I have problems advancing slides on my computer. Is bonding right for your project and legislative support? I would say that one of the biggest factors in terms of whether you get into the bonding bill or not is your legislator. Bonding is different than other bills in that 2/3 support of the legislature is needed to pass a bonding bill out of the body. So an individual legislator counts a lot more than it might on a regular bill. And quite frankly, assembling a bonding bill is a lot of horse trading. The bonding bill, when it's put together, the bonding chair in either body, starts, they'll do they have the typical projects, they're going to put money into higher education. They usually will put money into wastewater, other projects, but then they just start talking about local projects. And those are, they do look at it. It's got to be a quality project, but a bigger piece is legislative support. And is the legislator who is sponsoring a project going to be willing to support bonding? And so I bring this up because if you have a legislator, and I'm not going to say which ones it is, because if it's your legislator, you may know that. But if they're never going to vote for a bonding bill, it is going to be really hard to get your project done. I have seen on occasion, again, never say never, I have seen, there is one particular legislator that I can think of up in northern Minnesota who will not sponsor bonding bills. And I've seen cities in his community that have had to ask legislators from the metro to introduce their bills. And on occasion, they have, the projects have been so crucial and so needed that they have gotten through, but it's a lot harder when your own legislator doesn't support it. And it kind of stinks for you. But that's a whole different story to talk about. But that's one thing. The attitude towards your project is also really important. And I'll be honest, there are some legislators, they like bonding, but they think of, parks and trails, it's a want to have, not a need to have. It's foo-foo, fluff. They're not. We all know that parks and trails are an extremely important part of our community. That they're good for health, they're good for economic development, they're good for worker retention, but not all legislators get that right away. So you're going to need to figure out how hard is your legislator going to push, and it may take some education for them to get on board with your project. But again, it's something to think about in terms of, am I going to go for it right away, or do I need to better establish the relationship with my legislator and get them on board with understanding how parks and trails are part of the fiber of our community? The position within their caucus also is an important factor. It's certainly not, it's a lesser factor, but I would just say you are more likely to advance if you have a legislator who is, sort of an integral part of their caucus, whether it's the majority or the minority caucus, versus somebody who's sort of out there kind of in left field. But again, not sort of a yes or no in terms of whether you do your project, but it does have an impact. One other important factor, and you'll get this from talking to your legislator, is whether there are other projects in their district going for funds. One of the challenges with Greater Minnesota is because for the most part, other than your urban districts, like Mankato or Rochester or Duluth, the legislators have really big districts. So they're going to have, 10 counties, 15 cities, and a bunch of townships in there, many of whom may want projects. And, a rural legislator with a large district can get more than one project done in the bonding bill, but they're only going to be able to get so many. And so it will have an impact. You should never rule yourself out because of that, but it is a reason why you need to get to know your legislator early and get your project out there out to them early, because I'm not going to kid you, when it comes to the closing days of session, your legislator, the bonding chair may come up to the legislator and look and be like, yo, Joe, you got a project for this X, Z, and Y over here in your district. Which one do you want? And so again, it's going to be sort of a factor in your own calculus about whether or not bonding is the best strategy for you, as well as sort of how you pursue your project once you decide you do want to do it. Okay, sorry, I have to preparation for the process. Sorry, bonding is not the only option, and I'm not going to spend a lot of other times on this. But again, when you do that calculus, remember there are other ways to go. Legacy funds obviously is a very popular one. In fact, the struggle I run into right now with bonding for parks and trails is you get some legislators who are like, oh, we don't need to do parks and trails in the bonding bill anymore. We've got legacy. And we always have to remind them, legacy is supposed to complement. It does not supplant bonding bills. It's another source, but it is not the only source. And then obviously there's challenges. If your park and trail is not designated, you may not be eligible for legacy. But if you're eligible for legacy, I'm going to be honest, it's easier to get than bonding money. DNR grant programs. Again, these are great. The local and regional trails and the outdoor recreation projects, there's a couple other programs they have. The deadline just closed at the end of March, but it does happen every year, and a big priority for us has been putting more money in those programs. If you have a project that fits that size, that is a much easier route to pursue. LCCMR grants. The LCCMR is the Legislative Citizens Commission on Minnesota Resources, and they're the ones that recommend how the Environmental Natural Resource Trust Fund, i.e. lottery money, should be spent. Over the years, I've actually been a big proponent telling people like, hey, you should go get your money this way. It's another great way to fund your park and trails. Right now, at this very moment, I am not as big of a fan. Program itself is really great. The legislature keeps janking around with it. But that's a different problem. And if you want to know more, tune into my next legislative update. But something that sort of in the longer term is a good way to look. There's always a lot of federal grants out there. Not something we focus on as much, but I know, I like my buddy down in La Crescent, who's been really building out the wagon wheel trail. A lot of that he has done with federal transportation grants and whatnot. And then there's also transportation programs to keep your eyes open, such as Safe Routes for Schools. Sorry. Okay, so now we've decided, yes, I'm going to go for bonding. I've got a great project. Let's do it. So what do you do next? You need to nail down your details. I've still astonished, even sometimes when it's my own dear clients who I've worked with for years, come to me and be like, okay, we're going for bonding. And they still don't know kind of like what their cost estimates are and whatnot. You kind of want to have a good idea as you're going into this process. What does your project look like? What are the approximate costs? Obviously you haven't put bids out, but you kind of have to have a good idea. What am I, do I need design, pre-design, buy, my buying property, whatnot. You want to have all those details down because it really helps you then, again, paint a picture and make an easier case. Because really, when you're pushing for bonding money, it is really about painting a picture that the state needs to put money into your project. You also need to be lining up your local government support. So again, if you are not the city or county administrator, you need to be working with them to make sure that you are going to be one of the projects that your city or county moves forward. I also think it's really important, especially when you start moving further down the process, to have the support of your mayor or your county commissioners or city council members. The local elected officials can make a big difference. They will often know your legislator, probably, maybe better than you do, and can help advocate that way. And, I've seen a lot of mayors I know, I think this is true of county commissioners as well throughout the state, who have friends, they're politically engaged and they have friends who are legislators, so they can be in help that way as well. So, making sure you have your local government support. You also want to start engaging your legislators. Like I said, they are going to play one of the biggest roles in terms of whether your project moves forward. Make sure you have your details nailed down before you go talk to your legislator. But, that's why it's always important to build a relationship with those legislators early on. And then as you're starting to put together your bonding project, let them know, engage them in the process, get them engaged and involved so that they're going to want to make this happen too. And then the next thing you're going to need to do is work with the MMB capital budget system. I have a separate slide on that as well. If I can figure out. Okay, so MMB, which is the Minnesota Management and Budget Office, they're basically the people who kind of run bonding. The legislature decides what's in the bill, the governor signs it, but MMB has a role at both the beginning and the end. They're the ones who sell the bonds, and they're the ones who make sure that you sign the grant up, you sign your applications and all that legal stuff. They have a system called the capital budget system, and that collects the information regarding bonding requests. And they will be opening that system up in May, but local governments, a city or a county, can submit more than one project request. And so, it may be that your county is looking to, redo their government center, and they're also going to help you with a park project. They can submit more than one bonding project, but the projects are submitted together and they will be ranked by priority by the county. Again, that's why it's always important to have relationships with those throughout your government entity to try and get to be ranked higher. The system, again, like I said, will open in May, and MMB will be notifying local governments about this. We will put something in our newsletter, but they'll be letting you know the dates when you can get in there, and then the submissions will be due in mid-June. And then MMB will take those submissions and forward them to the Senate and House Capital Investment Committees. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens after that goes on. The MMB will be, during the next several months, also looking at your project applications, and you may get questions from them and you may have to update your submission. And that's not a big deal. I've had clients who've had to do that before, and don't worry about it if you have to do that. But then next, and this is where, the further we get along, we're still in the initial phases, so it's easier to understand. The further we get along, the more we are in the sausage making. But sort of the initial phases for the legislature are tours, bonding tours. Who doesn't love a bonding tour? Honestly, I don't really want to be a legislator, but if I was, I would want to be on the bonding committee, because you get to go on these tours and they go around the state. They organize by geography, and they get to see all these potential projects. I think, to me, that sounds really fun. These legislative tours take place usually starting late summer through the fall. House usually does theirs before the Senate. Sometimes they'll even, end up going until winter. Organized by geography, so they'll do a western one, a northwestern one, a northeastern one, that kind of thing. And it's the committee chair, so the chair of the House Capital Investment Committee and the Senate Capital Investment Committee, who have the most influence, are really the ones who, working with their committee administrator, select projects. And in case you don't know, that's in the Senate is Tom Bach, who is the Democrat turned incumbent, who very big power player in the legislature, Iron Ranger. And then in the House, it is Fu Lee, who is he's a I want to say third or fourth term legislator from Minneapolis, real smart guy. He was the vice chair last year. This is his first term as capital investment chair. So I don't know him as well, or am not as familiar with how he's going to work, but I think he'll do a good job as well. One thing I'll say is that you can still get money for your bonding project if you were on the tour. It's a lot harder if you are not on the tour. So, and honestly, I think Parks and Trails are perfect projects for the bonding tour, because it's something tangible that they can see. And if they have enough time, they can even come visit. I'll be honest, sometimes what they do when they have multiple projects in the same areas, they'll gather you all in a building. You have to do little PowerPoints, but other times they'll physically go and see projects. So I think Parks and Trails are perfect. And so again, this is where you want to be working with your legislator and kind of like encouraging them and helping them sort of make that request to the committee chair. I also think it never hurts, if you want to get on the bonding tour, you send a real polite letter to the chair and the committee administrator. And never forget the committee administrator, particularly in the Senate, but it's always helpful because they have a huge range of influence over what gets decided. Sorry. Gubernatorial process. And this kind of runs parallel with the legislative process, at least initially. Sort of the end product is, as required by the Constitution, the governor has to unveil his proposed bonding bill in January. You do not have to be in the governor's bonding bill to be in the final package, because the legislature is the one who passes bills and then the governor signs it. However, it is extremely helpful to be in the governor's bill. I've had projects both ways. I have had some projects that, quite frankly, I had one city, I won't say which one, where they were not planning on bringing forward a bonding bill or a bonding bill for a particular project, but the governor decided they needed this project, and so they kind of worked backwards and are like, I guess this is a priority for us, and we got it in the bonding bill and got it funded. There's other ones, again, we did not get in the governor's bill, but we still got money. But I think it's always more helpful if you are in there. There are some years I know, Governor Dayton did this one year where he's like, I don't want to pick amongst these local projects. I think you guys should spend a couple, X amount of money on local projects, but I don't want to be the one picking them. So it's possible that could happen too. I don't know which direction Governor Walz will be going for the next bill. The MMB staff is going to be heavily involved. They, like I said, will be analyzing those proposals once they come in for conformance, and looking at. Oh, I see somebody had a question. Somebody had to run. Okay. Looking for, like, are there problems with your submission, things like that, is the right information, do your numbers add up, that kind of thing. So they'll be looking at it. They'll also be engaged in making recommendations to the governor, like, these are really good projects, this might be really high need. The governor also has policy staff. He has a policy staff that sort of is at the Capitol with him and with the lieutenant governor, and they will be in there's one that will specialize in bonding, and then there's other ones that have subject matter expertise, and they will also be analyzing the proposals, and they may go out and do their own visits. One thing I always suggest if you want to increase your odds is that a letter to the governor and the staff can be helpful. I often will actually bring my client, a lot of this was done pre-COVID, and I'm hoping that by the time next fall rolls around, we'll be actually able to see these people in person. But I'll usually bring my clients into the Capitol and meet the staff and talk to them about the projects. I think invitations to the governor, or a staff to visit also never hurts. But that's sort of the initial process. Then the sausage making starts. Okay, so all this stuff I was talking about, the tours and the governor looking at things, that's all kind of happening in that fall to early winter stage. So then next year, 2022, the legislature will start. Because it's an even year, I can't tell you right now when the legislature will come back in session. We will know that at the end of May. When they adjourn in May, they'll tell us we're coming back on X and X date. My prediction is that it will be late February, but we've had them come back sometimes. Honestly, this was a pain in the butt when they did this, but one time they came in like mid-March and it was a scramble. Other times they've come in at the end of, or the beginning of February. So we'll find out soon enough when they're coming back. But at that point, the legislative committees may hold additional hearings. They may hold hearings for projects that they weren't able to visit or that they want to hear more information about. It is not essential that you have a hearing on your request, but I think that the more touches you have on your bill and the more they're seeing it, the better it is. So then again, sausage making. Each body will set a target size for their bonding bill, and they will assemble it. Typically what happens when the Democrats right now are in control of the House, and they are going to set a very, very large target, and the Senate Republicans, the Republicans are in charge of the Senate, they'll set a much lower target because they know that the Democrats are going to set a high target, and then sort of what we'll end up with is going to be somewhere in between. But this is just the dance they always play. And so each body will sort of work to set a target size and assemble their bills. And this is pure sausage making here. There is, again, some categories of projects that will almost always make it in. It's a question of how much size. But really where we're concerned about is, we want to make sure that they have local projects in there, because for whatever reason, parks and trails are considered local projects, and that's really where the sort of deal making comes into play. And as I mentioned earlier, it takes a 2/3 majority to pass a bonding bill. And so that is why, again, the support of your legislator, particularly if they don't have a lot of other projects, can really go a long way in getting you in that final bill. So what will happen, and again, sometimes it's sort of an ideal world, your school house rock, this is how things become a bill. The bonding bill will come to the floor of the House and they'll get their 2/3 vote. And then the same thing happens in the Senate. Over the last several years, we've seen a lot of situations where It's a lot of political theater, and the first time a bill gets put up on the floor, they don't get their 2/3 vote. They get, for example, in the House, they get all the Democrats, but the Republicans are like, "Ah, this bill's too large. We're not going to vote for it, even if it's got our projects in it." And reverse will happen in the Senate. They'll put it up on the floor, and the Senate Democrats will all say, "No, your bill's way too small. We're not going to vote for it." Then they have to go back to the drawing boards, redo it a little bit, rejigger it, bring it back up, and then hopefully they will pass the bills off the floor, and then it goes to conference committee. Now, in the olden days, and I remember these days, I'm not that old, but I do remember these days, they would have conference committees where they would literally like sit together in a room and the public could watch and they'd negotiate over the deals. A lot of the negotiation was behind closed doors, but a lot of it was still in front. Over the last 10 years, we've definitely seen a trend towards conference committees doing no work in public, but not much we can do about that. But sort of they'll be doing the negotiating, and I'll be honest, it really helps again to be in touch with your legislator throughout that process. But once they get that resolved, then ideally they will bring the bill to the floor, repass it in both bodies, and the governor signs it. I say ideally. We did have a situation in 2016 where they did the conference committee, they brought the bills to the floor, House passed it, they sent it over to the Senate. For some reason, this Metro guy decides to attach something on about something or other that should have been included in the bill. So they had to repass it and resend it over to the House. They ran out of time, so we had no bonding bill in 2016. And that's still a nightmare that many of us remember. We are hoping that never happens again, but sometimes it does. Factors in success, though. Let's talk about, we've kind of walked you through the process. Are there any questions? I feel like I'm just babbling. No, okay. Well, I'm gonna keep going. So what are some of the things that might go into whether or not your project's going to get in there? And I'll be honest, sometimes that's a little bit of just luck, but here's some of the other factors you can control that are not luck. Good projects. Having a powerful legislator is really important. But even if, you've got Senator Bach or Senator Senjum or somebody like that championing your project, if it's a crappy project, it's really hard to get through. So you want it to be a good project. You want to have the details done, but you also want to have it, and it's sometimes, the difference between a good project and a bad project is not the project itself, but it's how you package it. But sort of showing, the impacts to the community, how it really helps your community, how it helps the region, how it helps the state, sort of economically, from a health standpoint, from an economic justice standpoint. But, a good project is really important to getting there. A local match, I talked about this earlier. A local match goes a long way. Having at least 50%, if not more, is something that legislators will be like, that's a project that the community is really committed to. And, we know what they're going to get done because they've put that much money, they're willing to put that much money up towards it. Doesn't mean you can't get it done without a big match, but it's a success factor. Local support is huge. And local support, is really something that you can use in a lot of different ways. Like I said, local support is something that you use to lean on your own legislator. Even if you have a legislator who, not a huge fan of parks and trails, but if he's hearing from every local, business owner in town, or she is, that, this project's gonna, it's gonna bring people, feet traffic into my business. It's going to be helpful for me. I'm going to be able to retain workers if we get it, that kind of thing. If you have those local, folks, so it's not just the local government contacting your legislator, it does go a long way. And, one of the things I've done with some of my clients is we also, we use those local support at every step of the game, because, we might have them show up at the bonding tour, to show the other legislators that, like, look, this city, this county is really behind this project, and we might send letters in and whatnot. But sort of local support can really sort of help you. I mean, there was a trail that I worked on in northern Minnesota that we had a big crew that worked on it with us. And, it got to be funny because, they would all send in emails and they got to know the legislators, and we'd be walking through the hallways and the legislators would just point at us and they'd be like, hey, it's the blank trail folks. I mean, it was, that sort of support really sort of helped create a buzz around what we were doing. Now you have to do it in a way that you're not annoying people, and that you're sending it to the right people, but it is, local support can really help sort of make your project stand out from the crowd. And then again, that final factor, your legislator. And there are, you know, there are some legislators who don't like bonding bills, but will still put them in. There's only one or two I know that like simply won't do it. And I really apologize to you in advance if you have one of those legislators, but your legislator is a big factor. And the more you can work with them and your, you know, your city administrator, county administrator, and your other local electeds can work with that legislator to help them understand sort of how this project sort of fits into your community and how it makes it a better place, the better off you're going to be. And even if they understand it, you know, you have legislators who are sort of on what I would call the range of proactivity. I have one city that I work with, who's a legislator. She astonishes me. She's just great. I just have to check in with her once in a while because she's just on it, you know, right there doing things for the city. Their other legislator is not so proactive. So myself and the government in this particular community have to constantly remind them like, hey, you need to go talk to the bonding chair today. So, you know, there's a, you know, range of them, but your legislator, big factor in terms of, you know, what happens. So,
Elizabeth, we have a couple questions.
Awesome. Okay.
I'll start with Heather from City of Rochester.
Okay.
She said, great presentation. Any thoughts focused, at least in the House DFL, for climate and equity related projects?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I was just trying to see if I could see it, but I can't.
Can you see the chat?
No, I can't for some reason. I was able to before, but
any thoughts on the focus, at least in the House DFL, for climate and equity related projects?
Yes, and so and I'm going to explain what Heather's question is too, for those of you who have not had this browbeat into you by watching all of the House hearings this year. But this year, the House and the governor, to an extent as well, has made several things a top priority. And two of the biggest things are climate change and equity. And that theme has sort of suffused all of their hearings. It is going to suffuse, there's supposed to be a smaller bonding bill that they're putting out next week. And so I think that as they discuss their bonding bill, it is, and are sort of putting it together, those are things that they are going to keep in mind. And, you know, it's a challenging issue, you know, because it's, and I understand why it's their, you know, it's a priority, and you know, good priorities. Not all projects are always going to fit neatly into those baskets. And I think that, you know, ultimately next year when we have a larger bonding bill, if that, you know, if you have to have those criteria to make it into the bonding bill, I think they're going to have problems assembling a bonding bill. But that being said, I think it never hurts, at least for the House, to think about, you know, as you're sort of making your sales pitch, sort of, are there climate aspects, you know, or environmental aspects, or, you know, equity aspects that I can talk about with my project? And there, you know, there might be, like, for example, if you have a trail, if it's not only going to, you know, sort of, you know, be a draw for people outside the area, but it's going to help local people get from point A to point B so that they're walking or biking instead of riding. I mean, that to me, I mean, you know, transportation is a huge impact on climate change. So that's something that you can talk about. You know, another thing to talk about is, you know, everybody, when they you know, equity is kind of a squishy word. If you start looking at, you know, how the state is trying to define environmental justice, you'll see there's different factors. There's, you know, what is the sort of share of people of color in your community, but also sort of poverty and other things. I think, quite frankly, parks and trails, almost any project is going to be able to make a good equity case, because what you're doing is you're creating facilities that anyone can use for little to no money. And what you want to do, again, this is going to be more important with the House than it is with the Senate. You may have to adjust your, you know, talk to the Senate, talk to them more about jobs. But with the House, I mean, you know, and if you're talking about how, you know, this does benefit sort of people of all, you know, ages, races, you know, it might be that you've got a city or town full of older people, you know, that's, again, sort of an equity criteria too, because we need to be taking care of our seniors. But talk about how sort of your project helps your local community sort of meet its equity goals and serve people, you know, from here to there. I know one of the popular things, although you'd probably see these more on your grant level projects than on your larger projects, is moving towards more accessibility, at your park or at your trail. Talk about those things, because those are going to be important, particularly if that's sort of the scoring criteria that the house is using. If it's making things more affordable or whatnot. So I hope does that answer Heather's question? I can't see Heather. It's weird, kind of.
That's great. Thanks.
Okay.
The other question was related to whether or not we're going to be sending this out, sending the slides out, and we can do it a couple different ways. We are recording it, so we can put the recording on the website. We could put the PowerPoint presentation on the website. If you're interested in having us email it directly to you, you can just provide your email in the chat and we can get that to you too. So we'll try and, since we are recording and Elizabeth did do a PowerPoint presentation, we will try and get this posted in a couple different places, because I know there's probably some people that were not able to attend today for various reasons, but it's good information. So we'll get that sent out somehow.
Okay. Okay, sorry, I got distracted. I'm moving on. And again, ask more questions if you have them. I've got one more slide here. Factors in success. Some of the other things to keep in mind: start early. I wasn't kidding. Even though, the bonding thing happens next year, you should already, if you're hoping to go for bonding, I hope you're already thinking about it, or that you think about it soon, because it's really important that, given the work and sort of given how much of a relationships matter in this process, it is important to start thinking about and doing those building blocks soon, and always being ahead of the game. It means you'll have a better package. It means that people will know about it. Sometimes I encourage people to be sort of introducing and talking about their project, even in the odd year before the even year for their project. Persistence is really important. Again, there's always a fine line between being persistent and being annoying. So always, be careful, but persistence tends to pay. Sort of a one and done talking about it with your legislator or your local official, is not helpful, because, most people have a lot of things they're working on. So sort of the, finding reasons to, talk to you folks about it, have your, if you've got a local paper, be persistent about trying to get coverage about it in the media, and the local media or the radio, so that people in your community know about it. But persistence is really important, which leads me to sort of one of the other factors in success is success can take more than one legislative session. There are a variety of projects that may take more than one legislative session to get past the finish line. I mean, I had one project that a petty former governor vetoed, and we had to bring it back to the next governor and get it done. It took a while to get that done, but, that happens. It just sometimes happens that, some years, given the makeup of the legislature, they just are doing small bonding bills. And I'm not gonna kid you. There are some years where, for whatever reason, they're like, yeah, we don't like parks and trails, and they won't do it. But then you bring it back the next year and they're like, we love parks and trails. And so, persistence is really important. I would say if you've gone back like 5 sessions, at some point you may need to rework your project. But a lot of projects I've worked on, it can take more than one session to do. And it can also, sometimes you have to split your project up in two. I've had some park and trail projects I've worked on where the price tag was just too high. And so we introduced the full thing, but then they funded part of it. And then we were able to make the case like a following year that you need to fund the second half of it. So I think that was the last of my slides. And I guess we've had asked some questions. Are there any other questions folks have? I hope this was helpful. It's a confusing process, but like I said, it can be a really great way to help get your larger projects funded. And so I'm a big fan of it. And I'm going to stop sharing so I can at least see all of you. But I hope this was helpful. There's one more thing in the chat. Great presentation. Any thoughts on that? We already answered that one. Okay. Anything else? No, well, I'm glad you guys showed up. Carlin said she's recording it. Hopefully we'll figure out how to save it and share it. I know that last time I had to do that for somebody, I screwed it up, but Carlin's much more talented than I am. So thank you. And that's it.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Elizabeth. Good present.
Good. Thanks. Bye-bye, I guess. You know how to turn it off, right? And like
Oh, okay.
save it.